A bitter wind howls across a vast, treeless plain. The ground beneath your feet crunches with frost and crushed lichen, and ahead, massive shadows lumber across the tundra, moving mountains with curved ivory tusks and shaggy coats. You squint into the low winter sun and realize you're staring at one of the most intimidating survival puzzles in human history, the mammoth. No, you don't have a rifle. No drones. No satellite imaging. Just a few pointy sticks, a head full of tricks, and hopefully a plan that doesn't get you flattened. Welcome to the Ice Age. So before you enjoy the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. I always wonder, who's falling asleep to mammoth stories in the middle of the day? Now, turn up the volume and together let's begin today's journey of exploration. The mammoth wasn't just big, it was prehistorically inconvenient. Standing 13 feet at the shoulder and weighing over 10,000 kilograms, it was basically a hairy freight train on legs. But if you were a hungry group of humans 20,000 years ago, it was also the world's biggest lunch. One mammoth could feed a whole community for weeks. The hide alone could be used for clothing, tents, and drums, the bones for tools and even shelter. And the fat? Oh, the glorious fat, essential calories in a world where skipping dinner wasn't a diet, it was a death sentence. But here's the catch. You couldn't just walk up to a mammoth and politely ask for a steak. These animals were strong, fast when angry, and often traveled in herds. Hunting one was less about brawn and more about being incredibly clever, or slightly unhinged. Either worked as long as you didn't end up underneath one. Early humans, like those from the Gravettian or Clovis cultures, faced the mammoth conundrum with a surprising degree of calm. You could almost imagine one ancient hunter squinting at the beast and muttering, "We'll get you, eventually." These early people weren't just brute force with sharp rocks. They had strategy, observation, and something even more powerful, time. They knew the land better than we know our apartment layouts. They followed migrations, memorized waterholes, and probably made jokes like, "Remember when Oga tried to poke one and we had to bury him in 6 different spots?" One strategy was patience. You didn't always attack a mammoth, you let it. You encouraged it. You let it wander too close to a cliff or into a pit. Yes, early humans built entire pitfall traps, some over 6 feet deep and camouflaged with branches and snow. It wasn't subtle, but it worked. And honestly, there's something beautifully ironic about bringing down a mammoth using what was essentially a giant pothole. And let's not forget, the Ice Age was not just humans versus mammoth. It was also humans versus weather. Picture this, your stone-tipped spear is ready, but your toes are slowly turning into ice cubes. Visibility drops. Snow kicks up. Somewhere nearby, a mammoth trumpets, either angry, confused, or just bragging. Even with the danger, the mammoth remained a prize worth risking everything. But not just for its calories. There's archaeological evidence that mammoth hunting was ritualized. Hunters may have painted their bodies, sung chants, or carried talismans, perhaps a carved mammoth tooth or something weirder. Fun fact. Some Ice Age tribes smeared their weapons with mixtures made from animal fat and powdered bones, believing it gave the spear the memory of death. Basically, prehistoric performance enhancement. And yes, they painted the walls too. In places like Chauvet or Rafignac, mammoths are sketched in ochre and charcoal, giant shadowy outlines that make you wonder, was this art, memory, or just the world's first "we caught one that big" brag? Another strange detail? Some groups may have scavenged more mammoths than they killed. Bones found at ancient sites often show signs of gnawing, not slicing, suggesting that sometimes humans followed the real mammoth slayers, cave lions, or disease, and swooped in like prehistoric vultures. Hey, in survival, morals come second to meat. Of course, some people did try to solo a mammoth. There's always one guy, but most relied on cooperation. Imagine the scene, 15 people hiding behind boulders, one decoy waving a branch like an idiot, and everyone hoping the mammoth chooses the right direction to charge. At night, they would huddle around the fire if they could get it lit in the wind, recounting close calls and laughing nervously about how Grohl tripped and accidentally invented the mammoth slide technique. Next time, they'd say, "We dig 2 pits." Even failure was fuel for innovation. If a spear shattered, someone somewhere thought, "What if I tied the flint to a bigger stick? Or threw it with a little wooden lever thingy?" Spoiler, that's how the otlotl was born. And so, on this cold plain, with the stars gleaming above and the threat of trampling always nearby, our ancestors became engineers, artists, comedians, and daredevils. All to outwit a walking tank with fur. Just imagine. The sun rising slowly, revealing tracks in the snow and the distant shapes of mammoths near a hill. The clan stirs, pulling on rough cloaks. Today might be the day. Or maybe tomorrow. Time, after all, is something they had. What they didn't have was fear, not the kind that stops you anyway. What they did have was a kind of prehistoric faith. Faith that cleverness beats size, that cooperation beats chaos, and that, with just enough luck, you could dine like kings, hairy, frostbitten kings with a mammoth haunch roasting over the fire. Out on the open tundra, brute strength won't save you. Not when your target is the size of a camper van and has two swords growing out of its face. Mammoths weren't just hard to kill, they were hard to even get near without turning into an Ice Age pancake. That's where prehistoric human ingenuity kicks in. And here's the twist. Our ancient ancestors weren't just lucky hunters stumbling into mammoth traffic jams, they were tactical, strategic, and at times outright sneaky. The mammoth didn't fall to muscle, it fell to teamwork, psychology, and the world's oldest version of group chat, a bunch of people yelling and pointing. Picture this. A dozen hunters crouched in the tall grass, barely breathing. One of them, a designated runner, perhaps someone fast but slightly disposable, sprints across the plain, shouting and flailing a torch. The mammoth herd startles. Most run away, but one confused juvenile turns and follows the runner. This, ladies and gentlemen, is prehistoric redirection. Misdirection. A bait-and-chase maneuver not unlike what you'd see in a modern heist film. Only instead of stealing gold, you're trying to convince a 10-ton animal to fall into a very large, very carefully dug hole. Speaking of which, let's talk about pit traps. There's archaeological evidence of ancient traps over 6 feet deep and 30 feet long, lined with sharp stakes, then covered with leaves, snow, and mammoth-level lies. In what is now modern-day Czech Republic and Germany, excavations show rows of these pits like highways of doom. The plan was simple. Trick the mammoth into charging through an area where its massive legs would break through the camouflaged surface, sending it tumbling into a sharp surprise party. Not every mammoth fell for it. Some probably stopped short, sniffed the ground, and thought, something smells like human desperation. But even a failed attempt could scatter the herd or injure a straggler, giving the hunters another chance tomorrow. These weren't instant gratification plans. This was persistence hunting, with a sprinkle of slapstick tragedy and trial-and-error engineering. And it wasn't just about chasing or trapping. Sometimes the strategy was psychological warfare. Yes, I said psychological warfare against an elephant cousin. Humans learned how to use terrain to their advantage. Narrow passes, ice-covered lakes, steep slopes. Anywhere that made movement harder for the mammoth and easier for a two-legged hunter with a grudge and a sharp stick. Teams would drive herds toward these danger zones, exploiting panic and confusion. They likely used coordinated noise, clapping, shouting, throwing rocks, to disorient the animals and steer them like living bulldozers. And there's one very weird theory: burning grass. That's right. Some researchers believe that ancient hunters may have deliberately lit patches of dry grass on fire, not to barbecue anything, but to drive mammoths into a desired direction. Fire spreads fast, and mammoths, though large, weren't fans of becoming roast beef. A carefully managed ring of fire could nudge the herd toward a cliff edge or a trap zone. It's a risky move. Wildfire and wind don't always agree with your plans, but desperate times call for flammable strategies. Now, let's not forget the real MVPs of the operation. The kids and elders. No, they didn't throw spears, but they probably helped shape the land. Evidence suggests that entire families took part in preparation, clearing snow, digging traps, weaving ropes, shaping spears, preparing signals. The hunt wasn't just a show of power. It was a community production with roles for everyone. And while we're here, strange detail alert. Did you know some early hunters used noisemakers made of bone? These weren't flutes or instruments of joy. They were prehistoric kazoo-like screamers meant to mimic predator calls or create unsettling sounds. Imagine sprinting toward a mammoth while blowing into a bone whistle that makes you sound like a saber-toothed cat. It's half hunting strategy, half psychological breakdown. And speaking of coordination, some mammoth hunts may have included ritual dance or mimicry. There's speculation that before big hunts, people might rehearse the moves, literally act out the plan together using body language and stomping feet to practice timings. Think of it like a prehistoric football huddle, but with more mammoth impressions and less protective gear. What's even more impressive is that none of these strategies were written down. There were no diagrams, no blueprints. Knowledge passed from voice to voice, gesture to gesture, sometimes over generations. They didn't just know how to hunt, they knew how to teach others to hunt, a sign of abstract thinking and cultural continuity. We also see signs of specialized roles. Some people were the designated sprinters, others were the throwers. And then there were the trackers, we'll meet them in the next section, who could look at crushed moss and know which mammoth was limping. But for now, imagine this. The pit is ready, the herd is moving, the shouts rise. The wind carries the scent of sweat, snow, and ancient courage. You crouch low, waiting. Then the signal. The runners bolt, the mammoth charges, and for a moment, time freezes. Will the trap hold? Will the plan work? And even if it doesn't, even if the mammoth crashes through and keeps running, they'll try again tomorrow. Because this wasn't just about meat. It was about proving that intelligence, creativity, and absurdly big group projects could beat anything, even a woolly wall of muscle. Close your eyes for a moment and picture a prehistoric spear. If your brain just conjured a stick with a rock tied to the end, you're not wrong, but you're not quite right either. These weapons were not just sharp things on longer things. They were engineered with the kind of obsessive care we now reserve for gaming laptops or air fryers. Because when the thing you're trying to kill is several tons heavier than you and has feet the size of dinner tables, every inch matters. Welcome to the arms race of the Upper Paleolithic. Early humans didn't have access to bronze or iron, but they did have flint, and oh boy, did they know how to use it. Flint is basically the original all-purpose material. Easy to shape, brutally sharp, and dramatically prone to shattering into perfect cutting edges when struck just right. Prehistoric flint knappers. Yes, that's a word. Were the blacksmiths of their age, chipping away at stones until razor-edge tips emerged like secrets from within. But sharp wasn't enough. A mammoth's hide was like nature's version of medieval armor, thick, layered, and probably smelling like a damp carpet left in a cave for 3 winters. So the flint tips were often serrated like tiny stone saws meant to rip through fur and muscle more efficiently than smooth blades. These weren't just made by chance. Across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, flint spearheads have been found that are symmetrical, carefully balanced, and standardized in shape. Some sites show entire toolkits, carving blades, scrapers, and multiple sizes of spear points, all stored like a prehistoric multi-tool set. Basically, if you handed one of these kits to a time traveler today, they'd probably say, "Oh neat, it's a camping set from RI." And then came the Outsmarted. If you've never heard that word, don't worry. It sounds like a sneeze, but it's actually one of the most brilliant inventions of the ancient world. The Outsmarted, or spear thrower, was a carved lever that let you hurl a spear farther, faster, and harder than you could by hand alone. It extended the arm's leverage, turning even an average thrower into a deadly ranged threat. It's a bit like upgrading from throwing a rock to launching a javelin with jet assist. And when you're targeting a moving tank of a mammoth, that extra velocity can mean the difference between dinner and being stomped into a prehistoric pancake. Now here's a weird detail: some hunters may have decorated their weapons with carved symbols, etched spirals, or even small animal figures. Were they purely aesthetic? Maybe. But some archaeologists think these carvings were spiritual, hunting magic, meant to give the weapon a sort of soul or intention. Think of it as a lucky rabbit's foot, but more stabby. One site in France yielded spear throwers carved in the shape of reindeer heads, with antlers forming the hook that launched the spear. It's hard to say whether the reindeer decoration was about reverence, camouflage, or just good old Ice Age swag, but it shows that utility and beauty weren't strangers. And if you really want strange, some early weapon makers were mixing materials. Bone, antler, and ivory weren't just for jewelry, they were used to create composite tools. Imagine a spear with a flint edge, an antler shaft, and a binding made of sinew and natural glue, possibly made from boiled animal hide or tree resin. If that sounds like a science fair project gone rogue, well, it kind of was, and it worked. Let's take a brief break to admire the spear thrower arms. No, not the tool, the people. Repeated use of the Outsmarted led to a very specific muscle build: strong shoulders, twisted spines, calloused hands. In fact, some skeletal remains of ancient hunters show asymmetrical arm development, like prehistoric tennis players who only trained for one terrifying tournament. But the real danger wasn't just the weapon, it was the coordinated volley. Imagine 20 hunters standing along a ridge, each armed with an Outsmarted and a finely honed spear. The leader gives the signal. In a blur of motion, spears whistle through the air like a deadly rainstorm. One hunter misses, another hits a tree, but 4, maybe 5 find their mark. The mammoth shudders, turns, charges. More spears fly. The attack is relentless, not because of brute force, but because the hunters have become a single, calculating organism. Like a flock of birds, but with worse hygiene and sharper tools. Still, for all their tech, they had to deal with some unique problems. 1. Recovery. Unlike bullets, spears don't vanish into thin air. After a throw, you've either hit your target or you're sprinting through mammoth poop to retrieve your handmade pointy stick before the herd tramples it into useless shards. 2. Maintenance. Flint dulls. Bindings fray. Shafts crack. Weapons had to be repaired constantly. Every hunter was part warrior, part field mechanic. You didn't just know how to throw a spear. You had to become one with your toolkit. Picture a caveman sighing as his spear tip pops off mid-hunt and muttering, "Ugh, I just fixed this thing yesterday." And finally, nerves. You had 1 shot, maybe 2. Miss and you might live to try again. Hit and you could feed your entire group. That kind of pressure? It's enough to make even the calmest hunter suddenly reconsider their career in mammoth management. But that's what makes it remarkable. In a world with no safety nets, no instructions, and no spare parts, early humans created weapons that worked consistently. And not just for survival, but for domination. Their tools weren't just sharper, they were smarter. A reflection of the minds behind them. So the next time you see a flint blade in a museum, don't just think, rock with edges. Think of it as the ancient version of a startup, innovation under pressure, failure baked into the process, and results that changed the future. The mammoth isn't just somewhere out there on the plains. It's moving. And if you want to catch it or even predict where it's going next, you'll need more than muscle and weapons. You'll need eyes sharper than a hawk, ears tuned to the crunch of frozen grass, and the uncanny ability to look at a bent twig and say, "Yep, that's a left-footed female, 3 years old, mildly annoyed, probably had berries for breakfast." Enter the trackers, the unsung heroes of prehistoric survival. In every clan or tribe, there were always a few individuals who didn't just see nature. They read it like a living book. They could follow the faintest trail through snow and mud, decipher old prints from new ones, and figure out, sometimes with scary precision, what a mammoth had done, where it had gone, and even why. That crushed patch of moss? A sign of resting. A tuft of fur snagged on a tree? That's where the mammoth brushed past, heading southwest. Dung that's still steaming? Oh, you're close. Like, get your spear ready close. Tracking wasn't just about hunting, it was about timing. Mammoths followed migration routes, many of them seasonal, often tied to water sources or patches of vegetation. The best hunters didn't just chase, they anticipated. They knew that after the first freeze, herds would move toward sheltered valleys. That certain wind patterns signaled an upcoming stampede. And that if you missed your moment, the herd might be gone for weeks. What's especially wild is that some of these ancient migration paths are still visible today. Etched faintly into riverbanks or marked by generations of mammoth footprints now fossilized in sediment. Imagine being able to stand on a spot in Siberia or North America where, 20,000 years ago, trackers waited silently behind trees, hearts pounding, as massive shapes moved across the horizon. But here's the twist, tracking wasn't always done from the ground. Some hunters climbed trees, ridgelines, or glacial outcrops to get a better view. That's right, prehistoric recon missions. From up high, they could spot mammoths moving in the distance, watch for stragglers, and estimate herd sizes. And they probably had a game plan like, okay, we definitely don't go after the one in the middle surrounded by 12 angry aunties. Let's pick off the loner limping at the back. Speaking of limping, trackers could detect injuries from footprints. A mammoth dragging one foot would leave uneven impressions in the mud or snow. That kind of detail could tip the scales. Injured mammoth equals easier hunt. It's a little dark, sure, but so is survival when your grocery store is a herd of trampling behemoths. And mammoths weren't just wandering aimlessly. They had habits, patterns. Trackers noticed that they returned to the same salt licks, watering holes, and mud baths. So smart hunters would stake out these locations, turning the hunt into more of a waiting game. Bring snacks. Wear something warm. Hope your decoy doesn't fall asleep. Now here's your strange but true detail of the day. In some regions, early humans may have used mimicry to approach the herd. That's right. Some would drape themselves in mammoth hides, move slowly on all fours, and try to blend in with the group. The result? A terrifyingly committed Halloween costume and an attempt to trick the mammoth's eyes. This wasn't as crazy as it sounds. Mammoths, like modern elephants, had poor eyesight but excellent smell and hearing. So if you approached from downwind and mimicked their movements well enough, you might just get close enough for a kill shot. Or you might get sniffed and charged into the next ice age. Risky? Sure. Bold? Absolutely. But the trackers also had another, subtler weapon. Silence. You couldn't spook the herd. A single trumpet from a sentinel mammoth, yes, they had lookout behavior, and the whole group could bolt, leaving your carefully set trap as useful as a broken umbrella in a snowstorm. So trackers learned to move like ghosts. Step only on stone. Avoid twigs. Hold your breath near sensitive animals. Some might even rub mud or charcoal on their skin to reduce scent and glare. And if you ever doubted the mental sharpness of early humans, try this. Trackers had to remember multiple overlapping data points, herd size, age mix, direction, terrain hazards, and nearby predator activity. Basically, they were running Excel spreadsheets in their heads using nothing but memory, instinct, and feet that probably hadn't been warm in 3 months. There's even evidence that trackers trained from childhood. Kids followed their parents on hunts not just to carry gear, but to learn the subtle art of reading the land. They practiced by following rabbit tracks, identifying bird calls, or, if they were lucky, being part of a mock mammoth hunt where no one actually got trampled. This kind of intergenerational learning is one reason our species succeeded. We didn't just develop tools. We passed down knowledge. Wisdom. The stuff you can't hold in your hands, but that could make the difference between a full belly and a fatal mistake. And here's where things get strangely poetic. Tracking a mammoth wasn't just about finding the animal, it was about understanding it. Its rhythms. Its fears. Its needs. The best trackers weren't just hunters, they were empathetic observers. They could almost feel what the mammoth would do next. It was, in a weird way, a relationship. One built on respect, even if that respect ended with one of you roasting over a fire. So next time you see a mammoth painting on a cave wall, don't just think big animal. Think of the quiet genius who followed it for days, through snow and wind, noting every cracked twig and flattened grass blade. The one who whispered plans to the others. Who crouched in the shadows. Who waited, and when the time came, they didn't hesitate. They simply said it's time. Smoke curls gently into the sky. The mammoth lies still, a massive, shaggy monument to the struggle that just unfolded. Around it, a dozen figures move like shadows in the fading light, working fast but reverently. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, blood, wood smoke, and something unmistakable, triumph. You did it. You outsmarted a mammoth. Now what? Well, first you eat. But before the feast begins, there's work to be done. The mammoth, after all, is not just food, it's everything. It's tools. It's warmth. It's story material for the next 10 winters. The butchering begins. Tools flash in the dim light. Flint scrapers, bone knives, carefully honed blades pulled from slings and satchels. Everyone has a role. The stronger hunters move the heaviest parts. The elders oversee the process, calling out reminders. Save the marrow bones. Don't nick the tusks. Keep the hide clean. No dragging it through mud again, please. It's messy work. Exhausting. But also sacred. Every piece is accounted for. The meat is sliced into long strips to be dried over the fire or smoked on wooden racks. It'll last for weeks, even months, if stored right. The fat is especially prized, rendered into tallow for cooking, waterproofing, even as fuel for primitive lamps. The bones, massive and heavy, are sorted. Some will be carved into tools, needles, awls, or spear points. Others, especially the large femurs and ribs, might be used as building material. Yes, you heard that right. There's solid evidence that early humans constructed shelters from mammoth bones. Add a few stretched hides and voila, Ice Age architecture. And then there are the tusks. Smooth, curved, and shining faintly in the firelight, they're not just decorative. Ivory could be carved into intricate tools, ornaments, and symbolic objects. Some tusks have been found etched with patterns not unlike early tattoos, spirals, zigzags, even what might be calendars or counting marks. It's prehistoric bling, sure, but it also hints at deeper thinking. Maybe spiritual. Maybe mathematical. Maybe just the world's first doodles. Once the practical work is done, the celebration begins. A fire is built high. Meat is roasted. Stories are shared, voices rising in the darkness. Someone inevitably exaggerates their part in the hunt. You should have seen me, they say, mouth full of mammoth. It charged right at me, eyes blazing. I stabbed it between heartbeats. The kids listen wide-eyed, already imagining their own future hunts. One sneaks a piece of crispy mammoth skin when no one's looking. Another pokes at the fire with a stick shaped like a little mammoth. Yes, those existed too, mammoth figurines carved from ivory or bone. Were they toys? Totems? Training tools? We may never know, but we do know they were treasured. And then, after the fire dies down and bellies are full, someone brings out the charcoal and ochre, because it's time to remember. In the flickering firelight, a hand smears pigment on the cave wall. Curved line, a triangle, the shape of a tusk, the outline of a mammoth in motion. The clan gathers behind the artist. They nod, they point, they murmur. This was their story now. Not just a kill, but a legacy. Across Ice Age Europe and beyond, we found these haunting images. Not just drawings of mammoths, but memories of them. Some of these paintings are over 30,000 years old. Think about that. That's older than writing, older than the pyramids, older than most of human history. And yet the urge to tell stories, to mark success, to pass down knowledge was already there. Some archaeologists believe the act of painting was part of a ritual. Not just celebration, but thanksgiving. A way to honor the animal. To say, we took your life, but we remember it. A mammoth painted in charcoal and ochre wasn't just a trophy, it was a kind of apology. Or maybe a prayer. And if you're wondering what mammoth meat actually tasted like, well, so were 20th century scientists who found preserved mammoth carcasses frozen in Siberian permafrost. A few brave or foolish researchers actually tasted the thawed meat. Their conclusion? Pungent, gamey, and unpleasantly fishy. So no, probably not chicken. More like woolly old beef meets freezer burn. Still, in the Ice Age, you weren't picky. You ate what you could. And mammoth, for all its quirks, was a rare and glorious treat. But beyond the feast, beyond the tools and the bones, something else remained. The story. A tale of cleverness over brute strength. Of planning, of patience, of teamwork. The kind of story that gets told and retold, long after the last bite of meat is gone. Because humans aren't just hunters. We're rememberers. Sharers. We don't just survive, we turn survival into meaning. So as the fire crackles and embers float toward the stars, the people sit back and watch the painted mammoth take shape. Not just a picture, but a victory. A moment of triumph frozen in time. A reminder that once upon a very cold evening, a group of clever, courageous humans looked at an animal 10 times their size and said, "We can do this." And they did.